The ships came on a Tuesday morning, 3,000 of them, each one larger than any building on Earth. They blocked out the sun over every major city at once, their shadows falling like a dark blanket across the world. People stopped in the streets and looked up. Some screamed. Some prayed. Most just stood there, frozen, trying to understand what they were seeing. The message came an hour later. It played on every screen, every radio, every phone on the planet. The creature that spoke was tall and thin, with gray skin stretched tight over sharp bones. Its eyes were black and empty, like holes punched into its skull. It called itself High Arbiter Zethrun of the Valkyrie Dominion. "You have 7 of your planetary rotations to surrender," it said. Its voice was cold and flat, like metal scraping against stone. "You will dismantle your weapons. You will offer your bodies for labor. You will become part of the Dominion, as all useful species must. This is not a request. This is your only path to survival." Then the screen showed something else. 6 planets, one after another. The first showed cities burning. The second showed oceans boiling away into nothing. The third was just a dead rock floating in space, its surface cracked and black. The message was clear. These were worlds that had said no. The transmission ended, and the world went mad. Some governments tried to fight immediately. Russia launched nuclear missiles at the ships hanging over Moscow. The missiles got within 10 kilometers of the fleet before they simply stopped, frozen emitter, and then fell back to Earth like dead birds. The United States tried the same thing. So did China. So did France. Every weapon humanity had built over 100 years of fear and war meant nothing to the Valkyrie. Other nations began preparing to surrender. White flags appeared over government buildings. Leaders recorded messages of submission, ready to broadcast them the moment the deadline arrived. In the streets, people fought over food and water. Families packed their cars and drove toward the countryside, not knowing where they were going, just wanting to be somewhere else. But in Geneva, in a bunker built during a war that now seemed small and distant, something different was happening. General Amara Okonkwo stood at the head of a long table. She was 62 years old, with gray hair cut short and a face marked by decades of hard decisions. She had fought in 3 wars and buried more soldiers than she could count. She had never lost a battle she could win, and she had never pretended she could win one she couldn't. Around her sat the people who might be humanity's last hope. Scientists, engineers, soldiers, from a dozen countries that had spent the last century pointing guns at each other. Now they sat side by side, their old hatreds forgotten. "They want us to beg," Okonkwo said. Her voice was calm and steady. "They expect us to fall on our knees and offer ourselves as slaves. They have done this before, to 6 worlds that we know of, probably hundreds more. They are very good at breaking species." She paused and looked at each face around the table. "But they have never met us." A Russian general named Volkov leaned forward. "We cannot fight them," he said. "You saw what happened to our missiles. They have technology we cannot even understand. We cannot fight them directly," Okonkwo agreed. "Not yet. But we can survive. We can hide. We can hurt them in ways they do not expect. And most importantly, we can refuse to give them what they want." A young engineer from India raised her hand. "What do they want, exactly?" "Fear," Okonkwo said. "Submission. They want us to accept that we are nothing, that resistance is pointless, that our only choice is to obey. Every species they have conquered believe that. And every one of them is gone now." She pressed a button, and a map appeared on the screen behind her. It showed the Earth, covered in a web of red lines. For the last 40 years, governments have been building underground networks, tunnels, bunkers, places to hide in case of nuclear war. We thought we were preparing to fight each other." She almost smiled. "It turns out we were preparing for this." Over the next 6 days, the impossible happened. Factories that made cars began making weapons. Scientists who had spent their lives competing shared their secrets freely. Engineers worked without sleep, building things that should have taken months in a matter of hours. Soldiers from armies that had been enemies for generations trained together, learning to fight as one. And the people, ordinary people, families and workers and children, they did not panic. They helped. They carried supplies into the tunnels. They memorized escape routes. They said goodbye to their homes without crying, because there was no time for tears. The Valkyrie watched from orbit. They had seen this before, they thought. The desperate scrambling of a doomed species. It was almost sad, really. These creatures actually believed they could resist. High Arbiter Zethran reviewed the surveillance reports and felt something close to pity. In one more day, the humans would understand their mistake. They would come crawling out of their holes, begging for mercy. He would be generous, perhaps. He might even let some of them live. On the 6th day, Earth went silent. No more broadcasts. No more messages. No more signs of life at all. Zeth single quotes Rand smiled his cold, empty smile. "They've accepted their fate," he told his commanders. Begin the ground invasion at dawn. He had no idea what was waiting for him. The first Valkyrie troops landed in London, just as the sun came up. They expected to find a city full of frightened humans, ready to be collected and sorted and shipped off to labor camps across the galaxy. What they found instead were empty streets, empty buildings, empty everything. Commander Kethfer stood in the middle of what the humans called Trafalgar Square and looked around with growing confusion. His scanner showed no life signs. His drones had gone dark the moment they entered the city. The silence pressed against him like a physical weight. "Where are they?" he asked his second officer. Before anyone could answer, the building behind them exploded. It did not explode randomly. It fell in a perfect pattern, each floor collapsing exactly 1 second after the one above it, the rubble cascading outward in a wave that buried 300 Valkyrie soldiers before they could even scream. The dust had not yet settled when the gunfire started. They came from everywhere. From the sewers beneath the streets, from the tunnels of the underground, from holes in the rubble that had not been there a moment before. Human soldiers, dressed in black, their faces covered, moving with a speed and coordination that Kethfer had never seen in a lesser species. The Valkyrie were better armed. They had energy weapons that could punch through tank armor. They had personal shields that could stop any projectile. They had centuries of combat experience across 1,000 worlds. None of it mattered. The humans did not fight the way the Valkyrie expected. They did not stand in neat lines and trade fire. They attacked and vanished. They used their own dead as cover. They strapped explosives to their chests and ran straight into Valkyrie formations, dying with smiles on their faces. Kethfer had conquered 12 worlds. He had broken species that were older and more advanced than humanity. He had never felt fear. He felt it now. By the time the sun set on London, half his force was dead. The survivors retreated to their landing ships and lifted off, leaving behind a city that looked like it had been chewed up and spat out. The same thing happened in Paris, in Tokyo, in New York, in Moscow. Everywhere the Valkyrie landed, they found the same thing. Empty cities that turned into death traps the moment they entered. High Arbiter Zethran read the casualty reports in his command chamber and felt his certainty begin to crack. "This is impossible," he said. "They are primitives. They should be begging for their lives." His tactical advisor, an old soldier named Vortek, shook his head slowly. "They are not begging, High Arbiter. They are fighting. Then we will burn them out." Zethrin's voice rose with anger. "Order the fleet to begin orbital bombardment. If they want to hide in their tunnels, we will collapse those tunnels on top of them." The bombardment began the next morning. Energy beams rained down from space, turning cities to glass, boring deep into the earth, seeking out the tunnels where humanity was hiding. The destruction was terrible. Millions died in the first hour alone. But humanity had planned for this too. While the Valkyrie focused on Earth, a fleet of ships was already moving through the darkness of space. They were not warships. They were cargo vessels, transport ships, mining craft, anything that could hold a crew and fly. They had been modified with stolen Valkyrie technology. Their engines rebuilt by engineers who had taken apart captured equipment and figured out how it worked in a matter of days. Each ship was crewed by volunteers. They knew they would not come back. They went anyway. The first attack hit a Valkyrie fuel depot in the asteroid belt. The humans did not try to fight the guards. They just flew straight into the fuel tanks at maximum speed, their ships becoming missiles that no shield could stop. The explosion lit up the sky for 1,000,000 kilometers. The second attack hit a supply convoy carrying food and ammunition to the fleet. The third hit a communication relay. The fourth hit a repair station. Each attack cost human lives. Each attack cost the Valkyrie something they could not replace. On Earth, General Okonkwo watched the reports come in from her bunker deep beneath the Swiss Alps. Her face was lined with exhaustion. She had not slept in 3 days. Around her, her staff worked in grim silence, tracking troop movements and supply levels and the slowly climbing death toll. A young officer approached her with a message. "General, we have captured a Valkyrie commander. He's asking to speak with whoever is in charge." Okonkwo nodded and followed the officer down a long corridor to a holding cell carved out of solid rock. The Valkyrie inside was tall and gaunt, his gray skin covered in dust and blood. His black eyes fixed on her with a mixture of hatred and something else. Something that looked almost like respect. "Why do you keep fighting?" he asked. His voice was hoarse. "You cannot win. You must know this. Your world is burning. Your people are dying. Why do you not surrender?" Okonkwo looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled, and the smile did not reach her eyes. "You showed us what you do to species that beg," she said. "You showed us those 6 dead worlds. You thought it would make us afraid. You thought we would give up." She leaned closer to the bars of his cell. "But all you did was show us what surrender looks like. And we decided we would rather die on our feet than live on our knees." The Valkyrie stared at her. He had no answer. Above them, the bombardment continued. But in the tunnels beneath the ruined cities, humanity was still fighting. And across the galaxy, in the labor camps and prison worlds of the Dominion, other species were beginning to hear stories about a world called Earth. Stories, about creatures who refused to beg. 1 year into the war, High Arbiter Zethrin sent a message to the Dominion homeworld. He needed reinforcements. He needed supplies. He needed help. The response took 3 weeks to arrive. It was not what he expected. "The Council regrets that no additional resources can be sent at this time," the message read. "There have been disturbances in several sectors. The situation is being handled. Continue your mission with current assets." Zethrin read the message 3 times, his hands trembling with rage. Disturbances. He knew what that meant. The other conquered species were watching. They were seeing what humanity had done, and they were starting to get ideas. On Earth, the war had settled into a brutal rhythm. The Valkyrie controlled the skies and the surface, but they could not hold the ground. Every time they tried to establish a base, the humans would attack it. Every supply line they set up would be cut within days. Every patrol they sent out would lose soldiers to ambush and traps and explosives hidden in places no scanner could detect. General Okonkwo moved her command center every few weeks, staying one step ahead of the Velkari tracking systems. She had lost 20 pounds since the invasion began. Her hair had gone completely white. The prosthetic arm she wore, a crude thing of metal and wire, built by engineers in a tunnel workshop, was a constant reminder of the price they were paying. But she was still fighting. They all were taught the breakthrough came from an unlikely source. A group of scientists working in a bunker beneath what used to be Tokyo had been studying captured Velkari equipment for months. Most of it was too advanced to understand, let alone copy. But they had found something interesting in the communication systems. They use a network, the lead scientist explained to Okonkwo over a crackling radio connection. All their ships, all their bases, they are all connected. And the connection has a weakness. It took 3 months to exploit that weakness. 3 months of secret missions to plant devices on Velkari ships. 3 months of captured equipment being pulled apart and put back together. 3 months of brilliant minds working on a problem that should have been impossible. When they were ready, Okonkwo gave the order. The virus spread through the Velkari network like fire through dry grass. It did not destroy anything. It did something much worse. It opened doors. It unlocked files. It broadcast everything, every message, every order, every secret to anyone who could receive it, including the enslaved species on 100 different worlds. The recording showed what the Velkari really were. Not noble conquerors bringing order to the galaxy, but slavers and murderers who crushed anyone who resisted. The broadcast showed the 6 dead worlds that Zethrin had used to threaten humanity. But they also showed the context of billions of innocent beings who had been killed simply for saying no. And they showed Earth. They showed humans fighting back. Humans winning battles. Humans refusing to break no matter what was done to them. On a mining world called Vethra, the enslaved workers stopped working. When the guards tried to force them back to the mines, they fought. They died in great numbers, but they did not stop. Within a week, the planet was in open revolt. On a factory world called Kethmor, the same thing happened. And then another world. And another. Zethran watched his empire begin to crack and felt something he had never experienced before. Despair. How? He asked Vortek. How is this happening? We are the Dominion. We have ruled for 10,000 years. How can one species, one primitive, insignificant species, do this to us? Vortek was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, and his voice was heavy with a truth that neither of them wanted to hear. Because they showed everyone that we can be beaten. For 10,000 years, no one believed it was possible to resist us. Now they know it is. And that knowledge is more dangerous than any weapon. On Earth, Okonkwo received reports of the uprisings and allowed herself a small, tired smile. The plan was working, but the cost was terrible. Half of humanity was dead. The surface of the planet was a wasteland of craters and ash. The survivors lived like rats in their tunnels, eating whatever they could find, fighting with whatever they could build. But they were still alive. And they were still fighting. A message arrived from one of the revolting worlds. It was simple. Just a few words translated by the captured Velkari equipment. We see you. We are with you. Tell us what to do. Okonkwo read the message and felt tears on her cheeks for the first time since the war began. She had not cried when the bombs fell. She had not cried when she lost her arm. She had not cried when she buried friends and soldiers and strangers who had become family. But this made her cry. She wrote back, "Keep fighting. Help is coming." She did not know if that was true. She did not know if humanity could survive long enough to send help. But she knew one thing for certain. They would not stop trying. The Velkari had come to Earth expecting to find another species to conquer. Instead, They had found a match that was burning the Dominion from within, and the fire was just getting started. 2 years after the first Volcari ships darkened Earth's skies, the war ended where it had begun, in orbit. The fleet that surrounded Zethran's flagship was not what anyone would have expected. Human ships flew alongside vessels crewed by species the Dominion had enslaved for centuries. The Velthran, insectoid beings from the mining worlds. The Kethri, massive creatures built like living mountains, freed from their prison planet just 3 months ago. The Sorkai, small and quick, whose homeworld had been the first to fall 10,000 years before. They had all come to see this moment. To see the species that had taught them how to fight back. General Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the human flagship, a ship built from the wreckage of 100 Velcari vessels, held together by engineering that should not have worked and willpower that refused to quit. She was 50 pounds lighter than she had been before the war. Her prosthetic arm had been upgraded twice. Her face was a map of scars and exhaustion, but her eyes were clear, and her voice was steady. "Open a channel to the Velcari command ship," she said. The face of High Arbiter Zethran appeared on the screen. He looked different now. The cold arrogance was gone, replaced by something broken and hollow. Behind him, Okonkwo could see the chaos on his bridge panel sparking, officers shouting, the sounds of a ship that was dying. "You have lost," Okonkwo told him. "Your fleet is surrounded. Your supply lines are gone. Half the species you enslaved are now fighting against you. This war is over." Zethran stared at her for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. How did you do this? You were nothing. You were insects. We have conquered 1,000 species more advanced than you. How did you beat us?" Okonkwo considered the question. It was a fair one. "Because you gave us no choice," she said. "You showed us what would happen if we surrendered. You showed us those dead worlds and expected us to be afraid. But all you did was show us that begging would not save us. So we decided not to beg." She paused and looked at the faces of her crew. Humans who had lost everything, their homes, their families, their world, and had kept fighting anyway. "You thought we would break," she continued. "Every species you conquered before, they broke. They saw your power and they gave up hope. But we are different. Not because we are stronger or smarter or better, but because we are too stubborn to know when to quit. You pushed us to the edge of extinction, and instead of falling, we pushed back." Zethran was silent. "I am sending you the terms of our surrender demand," Okonkwo said. "You have 7 rotations to accept. You will release all enslaved species. You will dismantle your military. You will submit to oversight by a coalition of free worlds. This is not a request." The words hung in the air. The same words, almost exactly, that Zethran had spoken to humanity 2 years ago. The irony was not lost on him. "And if we refuse?" he asked. Okonkwo's expression did not change. "Then we will do to you what you plan to do to us. But we will not record it. We will not broadcast it. Your worlds will burn, and 1,000 years from now, no one will remember you ever existed. You will not even be a warning to others. You will simply be nothing." The threat was delivered without anger, without emotion. That made it worse. Z. ETH single quotes Ren looked at his dying ship, his broken fleet, his crumbling empire. He thought about fighting to the end. He thought about dying with dignity. But he knew, deep in whatever passed for a Volcari soul, that it would not matter. The Dominion was finished. The only question was whether his species would survive to see what came next. He signed the surrender documents with a trembling hand. The war was over. On Earth. The survivors emerged from their tunnels and looked up at a sky that was finally free of enemy ships. They stood in the ruins of their cities, surrounded by ash and rubble and the graves of billions. They had won, but the cost was almost too terrible to comprehend. General Okonkwo returned to the surface 3 days later. She stood in what used to be Geneva and looked at the crater where her first bunker had been. A young lieutenant stood beside her, a man who had been a university student before the war. "What happens now?" he asked. Okonkwo was quiet for a long moment. The wind carried dust and smoke across the ruined landscape. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the sound of heavy machinery, the first steps of rebuilding. "Now we rebuild," she said. "Not just our world, but the galaxy. We help the species that fought with us. We create something new, something better. A place where no one ever has to choose between slavery and extinction again. Will it work?" She looked at him and almost smiled. "I don't know, but we'll try. That's what we do. We try, and we fail, and we try again. And we never, ever give up." She turned and walked toward the sound of the machinery. There was work to be done. Behind her, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in 2 years, casting light across a world that had refused to die. The Valkyrie had come to Earth expecting to find a species that would beg for mercy. They found something else entirely. They found humanity.